As economic growth strengthens, our quality of life suffers. It's time we address the reality we've been ignoring. GDP is one of the primary indicators to gauge the health of an economy, as it is the measurement of the total goods and services a country produces each year. These include consumer purchases, government spending, trade profit, and business investments. The government uses GDP to inform the federal budget, the Federal Reserve uses it to create policy, Wall Street uses this measurement as an indicator of economic activity, and businesses use it to predict economic performance and make decisions on production, investments, and employment. GDP is handy in assessing a country's economy. The more money that is circulated and jobs created, the better the GDP. In fact, GDP does not tell the full story, yet we put so much stock in this number, we use it as if it does. Countries make the assumption that a growing economy implies better quality of life, but the two do not necessarily go hand in hand, which is exactly what Nobel Prize-winning economist Simon Kuznets cautioned against. Kuznets invented GDP during the Great Depression in the 1930s, when Presidents Hoover and Franklin D. Roosevelt were looking for policies to combat the economy's collapse. Aware of the potential negative implications of this measurement, Kuznets warned that the GDP should be used strictly to measure the growth of an economy, not as an assessment of a country's well-being. So what are we missing? GDP measures sheer quantity of activity, but does not take into account any measure of quality of life. Everything that the government pays for adds to the GDP. No matter what the reason, when GDP goes up, it's considered good. So when companies pollute, or natural disasters flatten whole towns, or when we go to war, many jobs are created, which boost the economy. These all result in severe environmental and human casualties that GDP does not take into account. So disasters cause GDP to go up. People die, and economists applaud. Earth's resources are finite. So if a business needs to make a larger profit each year, they have to produce and sell more, which means they need to use more material. So each year, more and more natural resources are extracted from the earth. Take this example, a chain reaction considered over time. Let's say you own a burger chain. To increase revenue, you need to sell more burgers. This means ranchers need to raise more cows and set aside more land for grazing, which means they need to deforest land so cows have space to graze. Fewer trees equals less oxygen emitted into the atmosphere, which leads to less oxygen to offset the copious amounts of carbon dioxide polluting from cars and factories. There's more. The cattle ranch causes habitat loss, forcing animals that once lived in the forested area to migrate or go extinct because they no longer have the food, water, and shelter they need to survive. Because of the deforestation and habitat loss, you've now created a simplified ecosystem, which makes the grass even more susceptible to contamination by unwanted disease-carrying insects, which can harm your cows. Because your cows are eating your grass faster than you can grow it, the soil is left bare, making it susceptible to erosion. So now your fertilizer-filled soil erodes, and the contaminated soil travels downstream from the ranch to the lake, causing the water to become filled with pesticides and other contaminants, causing algae to grow on its surface, making the water murky. Since sunlight can't get through, plants can't undergo photosynthesis, which leads to a lack of oxygen in the water. So just because we want to eat more and more and more burgers, we've killed off the fish. Now you can't teach your kid to fish. You can't take your boat out because the water is no longer safe and the lake has become too shallow from the soil built up in the water. Your drinking water is toxic because it couldn't be properly filtered by the soil, and your entire city is mad at you because they can't swim in the lake anymore, are getting food poisoning from eating toxic fish, and their water is also contaminated. But according to the GDP, since you've sold a lot of your meat and made a huge profit, you have positively contributed to the economy. When we make money our top priority, we make decisions based on maximizing profit, instead of prioritizing the happiness and health of people, animals, and our planet. This idea of growth at all costs that GDP promotes costs us the planet and our lives. So what's a better way to do this? Well, there's a country that took these shortcomings seriously and came up with a brilliant solution. GNH, Gross National Happiness. Bhutan, a country of barely 800,000 people, located high in the Himalayas, landlocked between two huge economic and industrial powers, China and India, has kept their promise to remain not only carbon neutral, but carbon negative. This means Bhutan's natural resources absorb more carbon dioxide each year than Bhutan gives off. Determined to improve the happiness and well-being of their people, Bhutan took a holistic approach to development that balances economic growth with social development, environmental sustainability, and cultural preservation, all within the framework of good government. They call this GNH, Gross National Happiness, whose motto is development with values, which they consider more important than their GDP. As a result, education and healthcare are free, and their land is prospering. 72% of their country is covered by forest, and they have written in their constitution that 60% of their country must be forested for all time. This forest is connected throughout Bhutan by channels so that numerous forms of wildlife can roam freely throughout the country. Each year, Bhutan puts 2.2 million tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, but their forest offsets over 3 times that amount. By 2020, their renewable energy generated from their rivers will offset 17 million tons of carbon dioxide. How is this possible? Bhutan has created national programs such as Clean Bhutan, Green Bhutan, and Bhutan for Life to create a sustainable country. These programs provide free electricity to Bhutan's farmers so they don't cook their food using firewood, make electric cars much cheaper so more people will use them, and pay for LED lights. Due to these programs, the entire government has gone paperless. Bhutan's model is a revelation because the entire country shifted their mindset to be that of the well-being of each other and our planet first, and economic prosperity second. And it works. So what can we do about this, and how can it be applied to the US? It's true. The United States is not Bhutan. America's current population is about 325.7 million, whereas about 800,000 people live in Bhutan, making America about 407 times more populous than Bhutan. So it is unreasonable to expect the US to replicate Bhutan's model exactly, but we can take major elements from their example and find ways to scale it up. One way to do this is to take political action. In order for any of these efforts to move forward, we need proper leadership in place who will put the well-being of their constituents before their personal monetary gain. To do this, we need to take money out of politics so that the loudest voices are those of the people instead of the corporations and special interest groups who sway public officials' opinions. To do this, we must vote for politicians who support taking money out of politics and whose agendas match our values. Be aware of the issue. Now that you know about GDP and its effects, when you make purchases, keep in mind where the item comes from and everything it took to arrive in your possession. Know that what you do in life reflects your values. Tell your friends about GDP and GNH. Share this video, because the more people know about this, the more likely it is that we can address global warming realistically and change our mindset so our actions match our values. After all, we change the world when we change our minds.